Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay, are we ready to go live?
Mm-hmm.
All right, going live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live.
Good evening. Computer issues, just a moment. Emails. Want to try and do it? Good evening. Welcome to the January 25, 2024 Rental Housing Committee meeting. Anyone wishing to address the committee in person will complete a green speaker card. Please indicate the name you would wish to be like to be called by when it's your turn to speak and the item number on which you would like to speak. Please complete one speaker card for each item on which you would like to speak and turn them into city staff no later than the public comment section for the item you wish to speak on. Instructions for addressing the committee virtually can be found on the posted agenda. Our meeting is called to order at 7:02. And now I will proceed with roll call. Andrea?
Thank you. We'll start with Committee Member Balt,
Present.
Committee Member Brown,
Yep.
Committee Member Ma,
Present.
Committee Member Cox,
Here.
Vice Chair Rosas,
Present.
Chair Keating.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we will move on to item 3, our consent calendar. These items will be approved with one motion, unless any committee member wishes to remove an item. Would any committee member like to pull an item? We have one on some minutes on our consent calendar. Okay. And is there any public comment on the consent calendar? Are there any Zoom comments? Okay. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Committee Member Cox.
I move to accept the minutes and the consent calendar as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call.
Committee Member Brown,
Yes.
Committee Member Ma,
Aye.
Committee Member Cox,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rosas,
Aye.
Chair Keating.
Yes.
Motion is passed unanimously.
Thank you. So now we are now we have oral communications. We open the meeting for oral communication from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. Would any member of the public like to speak? Do we see anyone online?
There are no speakers.
Okay, thank you. So now moving on to new business. Our next item is 5.1, the rent stabilization annual report. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and committee questions. And we are ready for our staff presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Keating, and good evening, committee members. Item 5.1 is a presentation an informational presentation on the annual report for fiscal year 2022-23. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the Rental Housing Committee with an informational presentation on the annual report for fiscal year 22-23. A little bit of background on this item. The Rental Housing Committee has requested annual reports of the division's activities and an overview of those reports be presented by staff to the committee. The last annual report was presented for fiscal year 2018-19 due to the impacts of the COVID-19 emergency response period. As we emerge from the emergency response period, we are going back to the practice of providing annual reports on the city's rent stabilization and tenant protection programs. We are grateful for the support and collaboration from our partners that we received during the challenging times that we all went through. So a little bit about the annual report. It summarizes the services provided by the Rent Stabilization Division in fiscal year 2022-23, and it highlights the program's key initiatives to serve tenants, landlords, mobile home park owners, and residents of the Mountain View community. And I do want to make a note that this report refers to the division as a program because the reorganization of the program into one of the two divisions of the newly formed housing department occurred in fiscal year 2023-24. So I'm going to provide you with just a quick overview of the sections, and then I'm going to present the annual report on the screen so that the public can view it with us. The first section is an at-a-glance section. This is after our welcome and introduction. And this provides an at-a-glance informational overview of the program itself, as well as the program's impact during the past fiscal year. And these highlights complement the report, but can also be extracted as standalone documents. The second part, the second section of the report is an overview on the program. So this goes into a little bit more depth and detail. It reviews the laws and programs implemented by the division and covers the Rental Housing Committee, staffing, and community partners that work with us, and also an overview of CSFRA and MHRSO budgets for the past fiscal year. Section 3 reviews our program activities, and Section 4 highlights the key initiatives of fiscal year 2022-23. Those 4 key initiatives were connecting with our community, increasing program accessibility, strengthening compliance, and stabilizing tenant housing. Section 5 wraps up our report, and it goes over major changes and updates that are anticipated for fiscal year 2023-24. So again, I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint presentation now and transition over to sharing the annual report itself. Give me one moment. Okay, so here we have the annual report, and we will go through it page by page. The first page is our welcome from our program manager, Anki Van Dersen, and then we have our table of contents. The first page is, and these pages are facing each other, the next 2 pages and so on. These are at-a-glance pages that I talked about. The first one, first section covers the program, and it goes over a little bit about, in general, what the program does, the local laws and programs that we implement, and some of the highlights of fiscal year 2022-23. The second page provides a look back at some of the programming that we did during the COVID-19 emergency response period. And as you can see here, from April 2020 through June of 2022, we responded to 3,593 public inquiries. We held 64 rent relief and eviction help center clinics that assisted 870 households. And we also facilitated 97 workshops, webinars, and community meetings and pop-up events to help get the word out about the options available for rent relief to the community, as well as the information on eviction moratoriums and other laws that were affecting tenants and landlord and tenant relationships. We were able to reach 1,743 community members during those efforts. And I also want to mention that over half of the households that applied for the state's rent relief program were helped by us. And these are the next two pages. They also face each other. And these have our at-a-glance pages on program impact. So this is highlighting our 4 key initiatives that I spoke about a few minutes ago. The first one is connecting with our community. Outreach and education is vital for the success of landlords and tenants and for the success of our programs. So it's something that we focus heavily on. In fiscal year 2022-23, we helped 1,435 community members, and 97% of the people who responded to our surveys agreed that the workshops and office hours provided helpful information. And 15 of our workshops were bilingual. We then can go on to the second key initiative, which is increasing program accessibility. And because we have done such extensive outreach during the COVID-19 emergency response period, and we were able to build a lot of trust and support in the community, we've seen an increase in tenant petitioners and tenants accessing our programs in general. And this section highlights the increase in petitions that we've seen during fiscal year 2022-23. So we had a 181% increase in petitions filed between the 2 years. And 87% of those, by the time that fiscal year 2022-23 was over, were decided in favor of the petitioner or settled within a mutually agreeable outcome. And I also want to mention and highlight our summer community kickoff. This was our 2nd annual summer community kickoff. And in collaboration with our community partners, including CHALK, CSA, and Project Sentinel, we were able to host a family-friendly, housing-focused resource fair at Rangsdorf Park in June, and this was attended by over 500 people. The event had chalk drawing contests and story time with the libraries, as well as art activities at each table, and a raffle, and a lot of different ways to engage the community. It was a good event, very successful, and we know that the community was able to have a good time while accessing the information, the resources that they need to thrive. The third key initiative is strengthening compliance with our programs. So compliance with program requirements increased significantly, in large part to the new regulations that were in place, and also due to staff's outreach about those regulations. Specifically, we held 12 property registration workshops, mailed targeted letters to tenants and landlords, and provided one-on-one support for property owners. And because of that, we were able to increase the compliance rate of registration requirement between 2022's cycle and 2023's registration cycle by 110%. We also saw a large, very significant increase in the number of property owners reaching out to us about registration, about resources available to them in general. And specifically for property registration, we had 640 inquiries related to that. So that's pretty significant, and we were very happy to see that our efforts to reach the property owner community have been successful. And the last key initiative was stabilizing tenant housing. In Mountain View, because of our programs, the eviction rate remained stable, and we are very happy to hear that. We provided 24 housing and eviction help center clinics that were bilingual. 51 households received free legal assistance at those clinics, and 533 informational packets were mailed to tenants in danger of eviction. Those packets contained pertinent details on what to do and expect when facing eviction, and provided information for related support services. They also went out to the property owners, and we did hear from tenants and property owners that property owners were getting in contact with tenants and providing them with the information as well to make sure that they had the support that they needed. So it was a good showing and test of the ability for us to help build community and to support both parties through a challenging situation. The next section, this is where we actually get into the meat of the report. So now we are leaving our at-a-glance sections. The next section provides a little bit more detail about the division, or in this case, as we're referring to it for this year, the program. It provides an overview of the program and more details on what we do as staff. And it gives information about the local tenant protection laws, including the CSFRA, the MHRSO, and the TRAO. We then go into information about the Rental Housing Committee. And we did want to make sure that we specifically thank you all for your dedication and commitment to serving on the committee. Without your time and pertinent feedback, insights, and thoughtful consideration, we would not be able to implement the program in the way that we are. So thank you very much for all of the work that you do on behalf of the community and on behalf of our program. The next section goes over program staff and our partners. So you see your staff here. A multicultural engagement program is someone that is out of the city manager's office, and we partner closely with them. And then the Mountain View mediation program. And at the bottom there, we have the community partners that also support our program. The next two pages are budget pages. They show the operating program for the CSFRA budget and for the MHRSO budget. We have the numbers for the fiscal year broken down by expenditure group, and then also show the expenditures by fiscal year from fiscal year 2020-2021 through 2022-23. And then for the MHRSO, same thing, except that we show from 2021 onward, fiscal year 2021-2022 onward, since the program did not start until October 28th of 2021. The next section reviews our program activities, and we've broken them down into 6 major program activity areas: development and implementation of policy, the management of the petition process, the education of the community, implementing the eviction prevention program, oversight for the tenant relocation assistance, and monitoring and enforcing compliance. And then finally, we're getting to the detailed information about our key initiatives. So we went over some of the high-level points of it, but then we dive deeper into that. And each key initiative has its own page. So the first one is, again, connecting with our community. And as you can see here, we had a lot of direct outreach this year. We sent a lot of informational packets to both tenants and property owners for a variety of topics, including if a tenant received a banked rent increase notice, they received a packet with information on what that means and what they can do in response to banked rent increase notices. We also sent out packets to new property owners, as well as tenants who had recently experienced the sale of a property. All of the there was a lot of compliance letters sent out to both landlords and tenants, as well as those tenant eviction packets. And this allows us to, this specific type of mailing means that we can send information to the people who need it most, instead of doing only large scale outreach. So we can target the information to the people who need it and reduce costs to the program. The next section is increasing program accessibility. And here we're really highlighting the petitions program and the increase in petitions between the 2 fiscal years. And I wanted to point out that this year, 33% of our petitions needed interpretation and translation support. And 31% had multiple issues in the petition. So this is a significant impact on the program, and we are very happy to report that we are processing the petitions effectively and efficiently still as well, even with the increase. And we did hear from some survey respondents, and one of them had a particularly lovely thing to say about the staff work here. And I did want to highlight that our staff is very, very skilled at supporting both the tenant and the property owner through the petition process. The third key initiative is strengthening compliance. So we focused heavily, wanted to make sure that property owners were aware of the new requirements well, not the new requirements, but the new enforcement mechanisms, and that they were able to address these requirements as quickly and efficiently as possible on their end. And we ended up providing a lot of one-on-one support, both in person and through workshops, and through emails and phone calls. Our staff was very dedicated to this. We wanted to make sure that people were not getting fined or receiving fees in general. We wanted to make sure that they were able to complete their registration and complete their payments on time. And as you can see, we had a significant increase in the number of properties that complied with registration. We went from 42% in the prior billing cycle to 88% in the current billing cycle that just closed. And for fee compliance, we went from 93%, which has been our statistical average for quite a long time, to 95%. So this is a lot of staff work, and we're very happy to report the increase in both areas. And then our final initiative is stabilizing tenant housing, and we really are focusing on this initiative. We continue to focus on this initiative as we come out of the pandemic response. So we have the Housing and Eviction Help Center that we hold twice a month. And this year we enhanced programming by partnering with 2 additional organizations, one of which was the Assurance Mobile Program, which gives free smartphones and data plans to eligible individuals, and the Trust Field Response Program, which is a new service offered by the county that helps people during an urgent mental health or substance use crisis. And so they attend some of our help centers just to get the word out in the community about the services that are available to them. And I did want to highlight that we are working hard to support the maintenance of healthy and safe housing by implementing the specified capital improvement petition process last fiscal year, processing downward adjustment of rent petitions related to property maintenance, and we're coordinating closely with the multifamily inspection program for property inspections. And then the final section is our looking ahead section. And here we highlight what we plan to be working on during fiscal year 2023-24, including the potential new and additional regulations. So you'll see here, because this is a document that is kind of produced in the past and is referring to a time period that has passed, you'll see here that we have, that you will, as a body, the RHC will consider and potentially adopt new or additional regulations about utility billing and RUBS. Obviously, that is now a policy that we are implementing. And then at the last page that we have here is the information about us joining the newly formed housing department and becoming the rent stabilization division. We also have a message from our housing department director, Wayne Chen. And that wraps up the annual report overview. Are there any questions for staff?
First, I think we'd all like to say thank you very much. It was great to read the report, and it was even better to have your tour through it. So are there questions? Committee Member Cox.
Yes, just a few. I thank you. Somebody else sent in a similar question, but I guess I'd also like to ask this one because from the dais, because I think it's important for the audience. So I know that, that you wrote in your question that the purpose of the report is, there is to fulfill certain reporting regulations to us and to the City Council. But I'm just wondering, what do you consider the primary audience for this report? Like, I mean, is it us? Is it the council? Is it something we should be giving out to people who ask, what do you do anyway?
That is all great ways to use the annual report. So it's really a communication opportunity from our division to the public to let them know what's going on. And it is a report that has been asked for by the RHC and also provides an annual overview for the Rental Housing Committee as requested. So certainly that is an intended audience, and the public at large is also an intended audience. Additionally, other jurisdictions that are rent stabilized, we often share our reports with each other. So those are additional audience members that we have focused on. But it is a public-facing document, and it's written to be as accessible and communicative as possible. And you are more than welcome to share the final document with the public. We will be getting copies printed once it's fully finalized. So after this meeting, if there are no additional changes to the report, we will send it on to the printer, and at the next Rental Housing Committee meeting in February, we'll have versions available for the public and for you as well. We'll also have them at our office and in some other key areas around the city.
Okay, thanks. And the other thing, while you were reading through this, I realized that I had not heard about this Assurance mobile program. Can you say a few words? That sounds like a unique and interesting thing.
Yeah, so last year, the Assurance mobile program was coming to our help centers, and they were able to provide quite a few people with free cellular service. They've since had some changes in their ability to distribute phones to the people that regularly attend our housing help centers. So unfortunately, it's not something that we are still continuing with in partnership, but it was a very large part of what we were doing last year.
Okay, thank you. And I just also want to thank you for, it's a beautiful report and really highlights the good work that's being done here. And reading through it, I can just see that the work that comes through this committee does probably more to help more people who need it the most than anything else in this city. Maybe I'll keep the council in with that too, but so thanks a lot.
Committee Member Rosas? Vice Chair Rosas, thank you.
Thank you. So you mentioned that there were bilingual workshops. Now, and in the interest of reaching out the general public, do you have an idea what languages you did the workshops in?
Most of the workshops are provided in Spanish. We do hold a few every year in Mandarin, or we will hold additional workshops in actually any language requested, but the majority of the ones that we did this past year were bilingual in English and Spanish.
But you did do some in Mandarin. And that's new for this go around, or has been historically?
No, we've been doing that for quite a few years now.
Okay. Well, my interest is just basically making sure that we capture the whole community. I am happy that you are doing it in Spanish and English, but I would like a little more diversity, but that's okay. The other question is, and I'm interested in finding out, what were the inquiries in a general sense? What would be the majority of inquiries that you got from the landlords? Or what were their curiosities or concerns?
They were interested in learning more about property registration.
Okay.
And how to comply with that requirement of the law.
Thank you.
Yes, Committee Member Alternate Balch.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It says that 87% of the petitions were decided in favor of the petitioner or settled with mutually agreeable outcome. So that's approximately 3 out of the 21 that were not, apparently. Could you characterize those 3? Are there any patterns at all? It is a small number, I realize, or are they all for different purposes? Why they were rejected?
They weren't necessarily rejected. The decisions from petitions are determined by hearing officers at their discretion under the law. So I would have to go back and research on which ones were either not accepted or decided not in favor of the petitioner to give you a better insight into that. And I can definitely do that and provide that information to you.
Okay, thank you. And then the 21 finalized petitions, do you know roughly what the total number of petitions was, or do we get that by looking at the chart?
The total number of petitions is 45.
Okay.
And so at the time of the end of the fiscal year, 21 of those had been finalized. So the rest of them were being finalized in this fiscal year.
Thank you. And then one more question. The budgets for the CSFRA and for the MHRSO, are any of those expenses allocated from joint resources, or are they all separate dedicated resources, if you know what I mean?
Can you clarify
Yeah,
a
sure.
little bit on that?
So I imagine that some percentage of the expenditures for either part of the program are compensation for people, and then there are supplies of various kinds. And so are the people and the resources distinct for each component, or are they common people and resources that are being allocated across the two components?
Anki, would you like to provide insight onto
Yeah.
that?
So we have a separate budget for the CSFRA and the MHRSO. So for the CSFRA, all the revenue for this budget comes from landlord fees.
Correct.
And for the MHRSO, it comes from the park owners.
Yeah, and what I'm asking is, on the expenditure side, are these the same people who are working on both components, and then we're just allocating X percent to MHRSO and Y percent to CSFRA, or are they completely distinct?
They're distinct. So we have one FTE, one full-time person assigned to the MHRSO, and other staff is assigned to the CSFRA.
I see, they are distinct.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for the report. It is a wonderful, helpful report.
I'd like to sneak in a process question. So if we go home and we read through the report one more time, if we see, any place where we have a suggestion about the wording or something, or if we have a question on it, can we email you and it still would be considered for a possible minor update, or?
You can definitely feel free to email staff, and we will take the suggestion into consideration.
And it sounds like that should be soon if we want things to be considered because you're going to finalize the report soon.
That's correct.
Member Ma?
Thank you. I too would like to thank staff for the preparation of this informative report. Along the lines of the Q&A we provided to staff earlier. So this would be attached to the next Council Connections newsletter, or would this be sent as a separate email to them?
Either way, we definitely like to provide it into the council connections. That is like a weekly email to city council members of an update of what happened in the city that week. But any other suggestion or ways that the rental housing committee would like to forward this to the city council can be also considered.
Yes, I would prefer a direct email solely about this report. It's just a once-a-year report. It's not that much on the inboxes. Also related to the question in the Q&A, so you would like direction if we were to want a formal, the formal periodic reporting process to be done, right? As in, right now we don't have a process saying, the CSFRA says we should give council this information periodically, but you need direction to do that, correct?
Yes, so we like to have your input
Okay.
of how you would like to do this.
Okay.
Officially, this annual report covers the topics that are mentioned in the CSFRA, but it is free for the rental housing committee to further deliberate.
Committee Member Brown?
Through the chair, would Committee Member Ma like to present this to council directly? No? Oh. I would also like to thank staff. Thank you.
So one of the suggestions we have is that when this report is final, that we email it to council, or that staff rather, that we direct staff to email it and provide it to council. That sound good to everyone? Okay, seeing nods. Do we have further questions? Okay, so we get to deliberate one more time, but I think we need to go to public comment on this. So are there any members of the public who would like to speak to this? Looks like perhaps yes.
Nicholas? Let me go ahead and put the timer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicholas. I live on California Street, and I'm a proud renter. I want to say that There's a lot to celebrate in this report. I think that the city made significant progress across the 4 key initiatives that were identified. I was particularly pleased to see the increased outreach, more petitions filed by tenants, and more compliance from landlords. The only place where I think that we could improve is articulating some of the feedback that we're getting from tenants and landlords. We talk a lot about the satisfaction rates from participants in our programs, but on the other side of that coin, I think that we could get valuable feedback from voicing exactly what we're hearing from the community, so that in a formal way, staff can think about ways to improve the program, and also we can get thinkers like the committee to start working on some of the bigger questions that we are going to see moving forward, since there is such incredible growth in this program. For example, I saw that the online registration portal was changed due to landlord input. I think that other changes that were brought about because of input should be highlighted and celebrated. And at the end of the day, I think that improving this reporting element goes with the city's goal of good governance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Andrea, do we have any other public comment?
There's no other public comment.
Okay, thank you. So now, before we finish this item, are there any other staff comments or deliberation? Committee Member Ma.
Along the lines of what the alternate member was talking about, perhaps for next year, maybe as a direction to staff, is to also provide, maybe not in the report itself, but maybe as an off-report item, is a summary of what were the petitions for that year. Like we as the RC only see the ones that get appealed. For the majority of petitions never need to go there, but it would be nice to see, you know, maybe just like a one-liner just saying like this petition was about this topic, it was resolved this way.
Yeah, we can, go ahead.
We do provide an annual update on petitions every fall, each fall, every fall, in the fall. And we provided that last to the committee about fiscal year 2022-23, I believe in November's meeting, and went over, and that report does detail all of those topics, including what the outcomes of the petitions are.
Okay, I guess I'll just withdraw this direction.
Okay. We're happy it's already being followed. Any other feedback before we conclude this item? Okay, I think we're ready to move ahead. Thank you very much. So our next item tonight is 5.2, the Rent Stabilization Division Annual Update of Outreach and Education. And public comment will occur after the presentation and after committee questions. And we invite anyone who knows they wish to comment to submit a speaker card now. And we are ready for our staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Keating, and thank you again, committee members. Item 5.2 is the annual update of our outreach and education program. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the committee with an annual informational update on the outreach and education program, including summaries of the activities conducted during fiscal year 2022-23, as well as activities planned for fiscal year 23-24. A little bit of background on this. The Rental Housing Committee requested annual updates to stay informed of the educational and informational efforts of the division. And this presentation provides an overview of the tasks completed in fiscal year 2022-23 and provides a roadmap of activities that are planned to be implemented during the current fiscal year. The RHC last received a similar presentation. There is a typo here during its that is correct, November 2022 meeting. Excuse me, I lost a whole year there for a second. So a little bit of high-level overview on this. Effective communication and outreach are vital to tenants and landlords knowing their rights and responsibilities and that they are understood, implemented, and accessed accordingly. The division therefore focuses significant staff time and effort on effectively executing our outreach and education program. The materials and communications provided by the division are created with the intent to maximize understanding of the tenant protection laws and to do so as clearly as possible. And we routinely assess our materials and outreach methods to increase engagement and accessibility, including language access. This particular overview is going to be provided in two parts. One is a look back at the prior fiscal year, and then we're going to be presenting on what we're expected to be achieving this fiscal year. So we saw some of what we did last fiscal year in the annual report that we just discussed, and now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the more detailed part of all of that education and outreach that we mentioned in the previous agenda item. So we have three main goals, three main objectives for our outreach and education program for fiscal year 2022-23. And that was developing consistent materials that clearly communicate tenant protections, programs, and services, increasing engagement to better inform the community. And the third one, improving program efficacy, efficiency, and compliance to increase transparency. So what are some of the highlights here? The first one was that we updated the quarterly status report based on RHC recommendations. We all discussed this a few meetings ago when we switched over to our new format and reviewed last year's changes. You can see one highlighted here. We added in our properties and what properties are registered and what properties have paid their fees. So again, this is the end of last fiscal year. You can see we even got those properties registered to jump up a little bit by at the end of our billing cycle this year. We also changed the report to include average market rent and vacancy rate data for fully covered units based on unit size. We incorporated annual termination data for CSFRA covered units since the start of the CSA, as well as a quarterly look back for the current year. We incorporated mobile home data into the report. We incorporated Housing Help Center data into the report, which used to be reported separately, and we included public inquiries over time. We also conducted a targeted outreach campaign to landlords about registration requirements, program updates, noticing requirements, and compliance requirements. And this education resulted in a significant increase in our registration compliance, like we just discussed. For registration, it went from 42% all the way up to 88%, and we're pretty thrilled with the success of that change. The next one that we want to highlight, and I'm going to actually highlight this and break it down in three different ways, is our number of inquiries. So you can see here the number of inquiries received over time, and you really can see the significant increase that we received in inquiries during fiscal year 2021-22. That was due to COVID and COVID-related programs. And on average, for the past fiscal year, 2022-23, we were well above our average of about 2,000 by almost 1,000 inquiries. And you might be asking yourself, well, why did the inquiries drop? And this is why. So last fiscal year in 2021-22, we received 3,885 inquiries, but 2,531 of those were related specifically to COVID-19 financial assistance. And this past fiscal year, we only had 31 related to COVID-19 financial assistance, and 2,913 were related to other areas, other topic areas. So staff would like to point out that that is a significant increase in people inquiring about the program and rent protections, landlord registration. We saw a significant increase in people reaching out to us specifically about habitability concerns. And so we're starting to see the impacts of all of the outreach that we did during COVID to help people be able to stay housed impacting now impacting the other programs. People know we're here, and because they know we're here, they know that rent stabilization exists. They know that eviction protections exist, and they're reaching out to us, and that's what is highlighted in this data. I wanted to show the difference in the inquiries received for registration inquiries between the 2 fiscal years. In 2021-22, we only had 108, and last year we had 640. So it's a significant increase that is likely correlated to our outreach campaign that we focused on registration and fee compliance. And it actually, for the first time, landlords reaching out to us topped our inquiry topic. In the past, it's been more tenant focused, and this past year it was related to landlords. The fourth highlight that we wanted to discuss with you and share with you is that we created and distributed 3,122 targeted mailings to better assist hard-to-reach community members affected by the law. So that included 296 banked rent increase follow-up packets, about 1,100 termination notice packets, 355 new property owner packets, 278 registration packets, and quite a few compliance letters. And those compliance letters really helped property owners know about the requirement to register their property. And what you can see here is those registration packets that we mailed out to smaller property owners. And they actually also included the registration as a hard copy. We have a lot of property owners that, for whatever reason, are unable to effectively access the internet. And so we provided them with an opportunity to register with our support without needing to access the internet themselves. And that was very helpful for quite a few property owners. And then the fifth highlighted area is our attendance and organization of outreach events. We attended and or organized 63 outreach events this year and engaged about 3,100 community members, 3,100 community members. And you can see some of our fantastic staff here highlighted in this photo. And the other highlight related to events is that we held our second annual summer community kickoff, as I mentioned during the annual report agenda item, and 500 community members came out that morning to have some fun in the park and also learn about housing resources and other support services available to community members. We implemented customer service feedback surveys, and wanted to share some of the highlights from that. 97% of survey respondents agreed that workshops and office hours provided helpful information. 96% of help center survey respondents agreed that staff was helpful and courteous. 87% agreed that they received the support that they needed. And 100% of tenant petitioner survey respondents felt that they were able to find the information they needed to finish the petition process. And then one other area of highlight, and I wanted to share some of the kind of behind the scenes work that we're doing over here, compiling and gathering all of the data that we present to you in our quarterly reports and in our annual report comes from quite a lot of staff work. So this is one page of our extensive workbook, of one of our extensive workbooks, where we're able to actually track and gather the data that we then provide to you. So here's a little example of what that looks like. And you can see at the bottom of the workbook here, all of the different spreadsheets that then go into populating all of this data for you and the public. So what's next? What's coming up in fiscal year 23-24? You might see some of this and say, hey, we're already seeing these things. Well, that's right, because we are halfway through the year. And so some of these things are already being implemented. High-level overview, fiscal year 23-24 continues the communications goal, which I'm going to provide to you shortly, of 2022-23 for consistency. And it also contains many of the same core elements that were outlined from last year with an update to one of the objectives. And then the strategies are updated for 2023-24. Please excuse that typo. So the goal is to increase community awareness and understanding of the tenant protections in Mountain View. And our objective 1, is to develop consistent materials that clearly communicate tenant protections, programs, and services. And the strategies there are to design and distribute materials to inform the public of the tenant and landlord rights and responsibilities under local laws and regulations. And another strategy is to redesign the website to improve navigation and functionality. Objective 2 is to increase engagement to better inform the community. And some of our strategies include providing multiple methods for responding to questions and concerns from and providing information to community members, to deliver presentations, workshops, and community meetings, to engage vulnerable and hard to reach community members, to utilize multiple modes of communication, and to foster relationships with community organizations. And then finally, and this is an updated objective, is to foster transparency and trust in the community. And we plan to do that by communicating updates and major changes to affected parties, as well as the broader landlord-tenant community, and evaluating our outreach and education program outcomes. So some of the planned activities are 1, developing and implementing an outreach campaign on utility charges and RUBS. You can see here a postcard that went out about this topic already. And some other high-level items that we will be doing are including information in annual invoicing insert for property owners and the biannual newsletter. We'll be facilitating in-person and virtual workshops. We'll be conducting outreach to tenants on the impact of RUB regulations, and we will obviously be conducting outreach to landlords on compliance with RUB's regulations. The second planned activity is to implement an outreach campaign about registration and fee payment requirements, and those activities include information in the annual invoicing insert and our newsletter, facilitating in-person virtual registration and fee payment workshops, updating the video tutorials and the user guide for the registration, and now for the ability for property owners to pay their fees through our portal. So that was actually quite a significant lift for us as staff and for the program. We're also conducting targeted outreach to landlords on registration requirements, program updates, noticing requirements, and compliance requirements. And we will continue to mail compliance letters to property owners that may be out of compliance with the CSFRA and or MHRSO. And one thing I do want to mention is that this has to happen every year. Registration has to be current every year, and the fee payment has to occur every year by January 31st. So this is, again, a significant piece of our staff work and a significant piece of our outreach efforts. And we're focusing again on this particular campaign because of the changes to property owners' ability to pay through our portal this year. And this is just a little overview of the what the portal looks like when you come to log in as a landlord or a tenant. And we did, based on feedback from property owners and from tenants, change how the portal can be accessed with a search bar for the property for the public. And also we updated the login information and even this welcome information that you see over here. That's all been updated in this past fiscal year for ease of use. So just know that we're always over here trying to figure out how best to communicate information to the public so that it's as accessible as possible. The next section that we wanted to highlight is the redesign of our division web pages to help communicate information more clearly. And we have changed up how people can access the information on our website. There are now 2 separate buttons. If you click on tenants and if you click on landlords, it's going to give you an information page, landing page for landlords, or an information landing page for tenants. and then now has navigatable buttons that I would be happy to show you. Once this portion of the presentation is over, I'll open up the website and show you how it's working. We've also added web pages on healthy and safe housing. We have very specific web pages now for the Housing Help Center, for registration and fees, and for compliance. And overall, we will continue to build out these pages and have more information available for the public as we continue with this goal for the fiscal year. The fourth area of planned engagement is engaging vulnerable and hard to reach community members. So we've been doing this now for quite a few years. And targeting the Spanish, Mandarin, and Russian speaking communities. Those are the top 3 languages that are spoken in Mountain View other than English, which is why we target those languages. And we will be distributing accessible materials at high-touch locations, including laundromats and grocery stores. We are going to be and are now connecting with the senior community via the Senior Center. We've been doing senior-focused workshops for quite a few years, and we're starting to expand our outreach. So now we are also attending the Second Harvest Food Bank food distribution at the Senior Center to perform outreach. And we are connecting with the Chinese-speaking community more with the Multicultural Engagement Program. And we are specifically targeting outreach toward that community, including property owners who speak Mandarin to help them know about the laws. And then finally, we are developing realtor-specific training and materials. So what we've found in the past year specifically is that realtors really need to know about the rent stabilization laws in Mountain View so that they can communicate to potential buyers and sellers about the laws. And there is some room for improvement in that area. So this is a little bit of an example of what our language access looks like. Here's our Housing Help Center for Tenants flyer. And as you can see, we're provided in English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Russian. And here's some of our staff out in the community. And then we also have our planned activity of evaluating outreach and education program outcomes, where we'll be starting to do a little bit more of the comparative analysis of our data. You saw a little bit of that in the annual report and a little bit of that earlier in the presentation for the outreach and education program. And we will also be continuing to do this with the customer satisfaction surveys. And then finally, this informational update does not have a fiscal impact on the committee. So before I hand it over for questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go ahead and pull up the website so that you can see how it has recently changed. So we have our slideshow here. Everything that is in this is clickable and will take you to something to learn more about it. And then we have an overview of the Community Stabilization and Fair Rent Act. So this is the web pages for the CSFRA. We also have MHRSO pages, and those are being built out to follow the formatting of this as well. So we have our key points of the CSFRA and some other details. And then we wrap up our homepage with a calendar that has some of the events that we are holding, as well as information like if our office is closed. And if you go back up here, we now have buttons here, as well as over on the side navigation. You see those same ability to click on the content, and it will take you to this landing page, which provides an overview and then the actual pages that you can click on. And this is responsive design. So depending on how wide or narrow your ability to view on your browser is, it will respond to that. So one of the new pages that we just built is on healthy and safe housing, and I'm just going to give you a little insight into that page. So now it has information on landlord responsibilities, tenant responsibilities, and how to get information on addressing habitability concerns, as well as additional resources. So that is something that we are excited to have. And for tenants, similar information and content. This is all targeted to tenants. And over here, we have our resources and information with clickable pages, takes you to the applicable page with information. We have our FAQs, and then we have our actual regulations and resolutions. You'll see here the committee. This takes you to the committee page and the agenda page. And then finally, we wrap up with state laws and tenant relocation assistance. So we have, we haven't reduced any of the content. We have expanded the content, but we have made it easier to find and access on our website, which is a huge goal that we've had for quite a few years, and we're very excited to be able to actually be implementing it this year. So that is one of the areas that we will continue to focus on. It's always going to be a focus of the program because we will always have new things to communicate. For example, right now we're very quickly working on having a web page for RUBS. So as we move forward with that, there will continue to be updates and new information, and we will provide that information to you as soon as we have it ready. And that concludes staff's presentation on this agenda item. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the live tour. And I'm sure many of us will want to go look around at the revised website as well. So, Committee Member Ball.
Thank you. Thanks for another very informative presentation. On slide 23, just looking at the registration compliance rates, so about 12% of, is that properties or units who are not compliant? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're on mute. Oh, you know that. We can't hear you.
I wanted to pull up the PowerPoint there for a second. And it wasn't allowing me to navigate very easily.
Got it. Okay,
sorry about that delay.
No worries.
Let me go ahead and pull that up.
Yeah, slide 23. Yeah.
So this is properties that are not in compliance.
Okay, and
very similar count to units. I'm sure that if we did the percentage for the units, it would be very similar.
So then roughly, it sounds like then, would it be true that approximately 2,000 units would be non-compliant in terms of registration? Is that the ballpark? If we have 12,000 that are compliant, that implies somewhere near 2,000 that are not? Roughly. You don't have to get the exact number. I'm just curious.
Yeah. I would say that sounds about right. We have about 14,000 units. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then that's a fair number of units that are not compliant. I'm just curious.
1,700.
Yeah. Roughly. Okay. So order of magnitude. What's the disposition of those? And I'm wondering, do you see any correlation between petitions filed and units that are not compliant?
There is a correlation if a property owner is not in compliance with the registration or the fee requirements, that is considered significantly out of compliance. And if a tenant gives an increase during that, if a tenant receives an increase, if a property owner gives an increase while out of compliance with the law, that increase is considered unlawful, and tenants can file unlawful rent petitions to have that increase rolled back and to receive a refund for the overpayments of rent. So yes, we have seen petitions related to that issue.
And do you have a sense that that is a disproportionately high number or fraction of the petitions filed that happen to be for units or properties who are non-compliant?
Well, so petitions can only be filed if a property is out of compliance. So it is a tenant complaint-based system.
Okay.
So tenants the petition process is the process for tenants to reach out to the city for downward adjustments of rent because of their property owner being out of compliance with the law, either because they received unlawful rent increases, because they never received a rent rollback, because they live potentially in a building that is not habitable or has habitability and safety concerns. All of those reasons are reasons for tenants to file petitions, and registration and fee compliance are also reasons for tenants to be able to file a petition with the city.
Thank you. And then
that being said, the majority of the ones that we receive are not solely related to registration and fee compliance. Typically, in the past year, we saw quite a few related to other issues, such as unlawful rent related to concessions or habitability concerns.
Yes, thank you.
Can I add some information? Andrea just looked up how many units were not in compliance with registration, and it's 800 units.
800.
So.
Thank you for that. Okay. On slide 27, it talks. You speak about 296 banked rent increase follow-up packets mailed to tenants. Are those notices that a banked rent increase is being made, or is it a notice that there is not a rent increase and that is being banked?
No, it's when property owners file banked rent increase notices with us in the system, we then send a follow-up packet to tenants.
Thank you. Okay, that makes sense. And then my last question. On slide 38, the realtor-specific trainings and materials, do we know at this point, are those primarily around ensuring the correct disclosures in a sale, or are there some specific things that we know about?
What we found is that sometimes realtors don't know that the law exists. And so just having the information about the law is really our goal with that. So helping them have information that is correct and accurate about rent stabilization in the city is really our only goal there.
Okay, and that's for both buyer and seller agents. Is that an equal requirement, or?
It's not a requirement. It's just something that we found would be helpful to realtors and to the potential buyer or seller. So having more information and accurate information is always better than no information. And we found that this is an area that may be lacking in our community.
Yeah, thanks. I would imagine that this is a material disclosure that a seller could get into a problem if they don't put on their paperwork. So yeah, it's probably necessary that this be mentioned. Anyway, thank you very much. Very informative.
Committee Member Cox.
Okay. So this is a tremendous amount of work that you're doing. You know, like it's 30 workshops and 63 outreach events, and I mean almost it seems like that's equivalent to the number that are done in the rest of the city as a whole. And I'm just wondering, how do you decide how many of these events you need? And well, let's just start with that.
That's a great question. One thing that we've found is that attending events is how people start to feel comfortable accessing the resources that we provide, which are often so sensitive for people to come and receive help for, whether that is a property owner or a tenant. So we've found that just by having our face at an event, whether it's a half-hour food distribution drive or a 3-hour Dia de los Muertos celebration, that really helps our ability to build and foster trust with the community, because they see us and they know us and they understand that they can come to our office with questions and we're going to be there. So that is one of the drivers that we had. We do test different events to see if it's a good fit for us, but we really are targeting our outreach and event attendance toward those vulnerable and hard to reach communities. So we've partnered with the school district and we attend events at some of the school districts, the school sites. We hold community meetings with specific organizations. And over the past few years, we've worked really closely with the city manager office's multicultural engagement program, and those connections help us to prioritize what to attend and when.
So when you talk about outreach events, I mean, like, how does that break out between things like where you basically just show up and you have a table there to be able to reach out to people, or when, you're expecting people to come on a particular topic and engage with you and get help?
So we have our workshops that are specific topics. We hold 1 to 2 of those every month. We have a list of those. And then we also have our housing help centers. So those are specific times that people come to us for assistance. We now have them for landlords and for tenants. So we've separated them. We also have office hours that are virtual and in person. So again, that's one of those more targeted opportunities for people to come and receive assistance and receive help versus the more broad, we're out in the community.
Okay. So another question that I just wanted to ask was, I had written this one in, but I wanted to give some background on why I asked it. Because the report, this annual report, it was dated June 2023, and yet in November, we got a report that was marked September. And that's a later date than the date for this report. And it looked like the data that's coming in this annual report, tell me if I'm right or not, it's not as current as the one that was with the later date. Is that right?
The later date, the one that you received, that was for the first quarter of 2023-24.
Ah, okay.
What
okay.
you're looking at in this, the quarterly report that is attached to this agenda item is the final report for fiscal year 2022-23.
Okay, but I mean, like, the expectation is that we will get 4 quarterly reports plus an annual report, right? And so,
Correct.
I mean, if I just keep looking at this one was also seemed like it was marked quarterly as well. But I mean, if I look at each of the quarterly reports, I should be able to get a running sense of what the statistics are, right? Because the two things that are really, I think, important to watch, at least from my perspective, are, what are the rental rates of the various kinds and what are the vacancy rates? Because that really says a lot to me about, the health of the city and its ability to provide housing and what kind of housing it's providing and the future of what kind of housing we can attract developers to build. So I'm very glad you put those in the reports. So thank you very much for that, and keep up the good work on that. All right, that's it for me.
Your next quarterly report will be, update will be next month at the next Rental Housing Committee meeting at the end of February. And that will be for Q2 of 2023-24. So it'll actually be all of the activities through and all of the information through the end of Q2 2023-24.
Okay, thank you very much.
Committee Member Ma.
Thank you. On the surveys, how are surveys filled out? Are they done on paper or via a web form?
There are both options available. So it depends on how people are accessing the services. We've found that when people come into the Housing Help Center, we have it available in both formats, but people generally like to fill them out on paper.
Okay, do you know what the rough response rate is?
I'd have to go and check that. I don't have that off the top of my head.
Okay, checking. Thank you. Other item is about accessible materials in different languages. So I quickly checked the website for both MV Rent as well as the regular city website. And it don't seem to translate very well. The MV Rent one's kind of broken, and the regular website translates some but not a bunch. Is that something that staff can address, or is that done by vendor or by IT?
It is done by a vendor. The actual website translations is fully done by our vendors. We do have in the past and are planning on having some of our key pages once again in those 3 key languages of English, Spanish, and Mandarin. We have to build out the pages in English first and then translate them into Spanish and Mandarin. You'll see that some of our pages have that accessibility, but it does present a significant lift for staff to be, running web pages in multiple languages. So we're being very, very conscientious about which pages we are able to do that with.
Okay, good to know. And the last one is on the topic of realtor-specific trainings. Is that going to involve outreach to Silva or to individual realtors?
We've been gathering individual, like the contact information for individual realtors. But it's challenging. So if you have any ideas on how to reach realtor groups, we are more than happy and willing to accept some of those insights.
Okay, that's all my questions.
Okay. I'd like to ask about the postcard example in the report today. So it was about March 31 for the beginning then of apartments can't use RUBS.
March 1st.
Thank you. And so I was just curious, who was that mailed to?
So this was mailed to all fully covered tenants as well as fully covered property owners. So everyone, hopefully, that it's applicable to was reached. On the back, it also has the text that you see here translated into Spanish and Mandarin.
And it's a little bit small, but for new tenancies, so you said it was mailed to both tenants and landlords?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of a tenant reading this. For new tenancies, it's really clear. For existing tenancies, what's the gist of it? So
the gist of it is that RUBS may continue until a utility adjustment's implemented. Remember, I just want to provide an overview for this, that this is really a very, very, very early and initial touch point. We wanted to get information out as quickly as possible on this topic. This is not in any way, shape, or form the only piece of information that will be going out about this. This is really just the very beginning, so it's about as high level and simplified as we could make it, so that the major driving points were there as quickly as possible, since that March 1st date is coming up on us quickly. Next month, we will also have additional information going out to tenants and landlords, and I am going to try to have a web page up and running by tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then on Monday, with, again, basic information. And we will also have a very basic FAQ that starts getting some of the more details about timelines and all of that stuff out. But for existing tenants, what this says is that RUBS can continue until that utility adjustment is implemented in accordance with the regulations, that utility charges for vacant or newly rented units cannot be allocated to existing rental units through RUBS, and that utility charge is paid directly by tenant to a utility service provider, or sub-metered utilities are exempt. So that's the very high level basics of what went out. And again, it's going to be followed up almost immediately with more detailed communication within the next few weeks.
And I'm curious if the rental housing program is in communication with Conservience. Is that the correct name? Conservice, thank you.
We have been throughout this process, but we have not reached out any further than we had in the previous meetings.
Because this is a interesting, transition, because they'll be going to some units covered and some units not covered. So. Hey, I don't see more questions on this report. And so I think it's time to go to comments from the public, if there are any.
No comments from the public.
Okay. And then back to committee member. Any further comments? Okay, I think.
Well,
okay.
so I just want to thank the staff of the success that I think that we're having with this program. I mean, a 50% increase in compliance is a huge, huge endeavor. So I want to thank the staff for all the hard work that they're doing. And I'm pretty sure the old rental housing committees are feeling a little bit jealous. Because I know they work really hard to get to where we're at right now. But I think all their hard work definitely is paying off.
Committee member Ma.
As a point of clarification, we are revisiting compliance next meeting, correct? Okay, then.
We're doing the update, so we're going to give you the numbers
Okay.
that are reached because of the compliance. Yeah.
Okay, I think we are done with this item. Thank you, everyone. Our next item is item 5.3, annual update on relevant legislation and case law in California. Public comment will occur after the presentation item and after committee questions. And anyone who would like to comment, we invite you to submit a speaker card soon. And we're ready for our presentation.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Naz.
Can you all hear me okay? Yes, okay. We can go to the first slide. After this too. All right, so the purpose of this item is to receive a presentation from the Rental Housing Committee's Council on updates to relevant legislation in California. For those who have not been here for these before, typically this does also include relevant case law, but there just wasn't any that we thought was significant this year related to the work that you all are doing. And so that's the reason that there isn't any case law updates as of this moment. Next slide. All right, so starting with the biggest piece of landlord-tenant legislation from this past legislative cycle, SB 567, this bill makes up significant updates to the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, or AB 1482, as many call it. If you are not familiar, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 provided caps on rent increases and just cause for eviction protections for many tenancies in the state. The Tenant Protection Act, the reason we're talking about it is that it may apply to some tenancies in Mountain View that are not covered by the CSFRA. So for many of these points that we'll go over, the CSFRA's provisions will prevail over the Tenant Protection Act because that is the law that's applicable to the unit. But in some instances, the Tenant Protection Act will apply where the CSFRA does not. So among the just causes that the Tenant Protection Act provided for are owner move-in and demolition or substantial remodeling. So since the time that the Tenant Protection Act was has gone into effect, these two just causes in particular have been used by certain bad actor landlords in order to circumvent the just cause for eviction requirement because there were some loopholes in here. And for that reason, SB 567 imposes additional parameters on a landlord's use of these two just causes in order to close those loopholes, or at least attempt to. This bill also provides a city attorney or county council, as well as the state attorney general, with authority to enforce the provisions of the law, including seeking injunctive relief where there is a landlord who is violating these laws or the provisions of the law. And finally, it authorizes 3 times the damages where there's a showing that the landlord has acted willfully or with oppression, fraud, or malice in violating the law. Next slide. So getting into terminations for owner move-in under the Tenant Protection Act. So the Tenant Protection Act, similar to the CSFRA, provides for owner move-in, and that includes where the owner or the owner's spouse, domestic partner, child, grandchild, parent, or grandparent intends to occupy the rental unit as their primary residence. So one of the issues that was coming up was the use of the owner move-in provisions by LLCs in which there was no natural person or corporations in order to, as I mentioned, circumvent the just cause for eviction protections. So there's now a new definition of owner in SB 567, which includes a natural person with at least 25% recorded ownership interest in the property, or a natural person who has any recorded interest if 100% of the recorded ownership is divided among owners who are related. And so that would be a situation where there are maybe 5 siblings who have, or cousins or whoever it is, who have inherited the property from their grandparent or from a parent. And so they wouldn't have the 25% required amount to move into the unit to do an owner move-in, but because they're all related, their 20% recorded interest is sufficient in order to allow them to do an owner move-in. And then finally, the new definition of owner also includes a natural person whose recorded interest in the property is through a limited liability company or a partnership, and who owns 25% or more of the equity interest in said entity. So in the limited liability company or in the partnership. Next slide. So in addition to those requirements, SB 567 provides that a landlord or an owner cannot evict if the intended occupant already resides on the property or if a similar unit on the property is vacant. It also requires the intended occupant to move in within 90 days after the tenant vacates and to occupy the unit as their primary residence for 12 continuous months. If either of these conditions is not met, so the intended occupant doesn't move in within 90 days or doesn't occupy for 12 continuous months, then the landlord must first re-offer the unit to the displaced tenant at the same rent and the same lease terms and pay their reasonable moving expenses above and beyond the relocation assistance that is required by the Tenant Protection Act, which is the amount of 1 month's rent. If the displaced tenant rejects the offer to move back into the unit, then the landlord may re-rent the unit to another tenant, but only at the same rent that was in effect at the time the termination notice was served. And if the intended occupant passes away before either condition applies, so if they pass away within the 90 days after the tenant vacates, or if they pass away during the 12 months that they're occupying the unit as their primary residence, then this does not constitute a failure to comply with the requirements, and the landlord is not required to reoffer the unit to the displaced tenant before re-renting it. Next slide. So terminations for demolition or substantial remodel. So there is a more comprehensive definition of substantially remodel in SB 567 than in the prior version of the Tenant Protection Act. Substantially remodel now means either of the following that cannot be reasonably accomplished in a safe manner while the tenant remains in the unit, and that requires the tenant to vacate for at least 30 consecutive days. So either replacement or substantial modification of any structural, electrical, plumbing, or mechanical system that requires a permit from a governmental agency. That part is particularly important. And then abatement of hazardous materials in accordance with local, state, or federal law. Next slide. So for a termination for demolition or substantial remodel, there are also certain requirements now related to the information that must be included in the termination notice itself. So the first is that a statement that if the substantial remodel or demolition is not commenced or completed, the owner must offer the opportunity to re-rent at the same rent and lease terms to the displaced tenant. And also a statement that the tenant has to notify the landlord within 30 days of their interest to reoccupy the unit and to provide their contact information. Another piece is a description of the substantial remodel and demolition plans, including the schedule. What that means is the approximate estimated time that the substantial remodel is going to take and when it's planned to commence, or for the demolition, the approximate date on which the demolition is planned to take place. In addition, the landlord must include copies of the permits, or alternatively, if the work is of a type that does not require a permit, they must include copies of signed contracts with contractors for the planned work. And then lastly, there is, as I mentioned, a notification that if the tenant is interested in reoccupying the unit after the substantial remodel, the tenant must inform the owner of this interest and provide their information. So this is there are two places where a tenant could potentially reoccupy a unit when it comes to substantial remodel or demolition. The first is if the substantial remodel or demolition is not started or completed, or if there's a substantial remodel, the tenant can also say after it's completed, I'm interested in reoccupying, landlord, please let me know. I want to move back into the unit. Next slide. Okay, oh, and just on that one, the provisions, those new provisions of the Tenant Protection Act go into effect on April 1st, 2024. So they're not yet in effect right now, but we're 3 months away from that. All right, moving on to security deposits, AB 12. AB 12 prohibits a landlord from demanding or receiving a security deposit in excess of an amount equal to 1 month's rent. Current law, existing law, is 2 months' rent for unfurnished units and 3 months' rent for furnished units. The distinction between furnished and unfurnished units has been eliminated, and now a landlord can only charge 1 month's rent unless they fall into this category where they're a natural person, meaning not an LLC, not a corporation, not a partnership, and they own no more than 2 residential properties with a total of 4 dwelling units. Oh, so I'm sorry, it's a natural person or an LLC in which all of the members are natural persons. So, yeah, so if the landlord is a natural person, or if the landlord is an LLC in which all of the members are natural persons, and the landlord owns no more than 2 residential rental properties totaling no more than 4 units, they can require a security deposit in an amount not to exceed 2 months' rent. And these provisions are effective as of July 1st, 2024, so they do not apply to any security deposits that are demanded or received by the landlord prior to that date. Okay, SB 267 relates to credit history, the use of credit history, determining the eligibility of a tenant who has a government subsidy, such as the Section 8 voucher. So existing law provides that where a tenant has a government subsidy, the landlord cannot determine the tenant's eligibility for the rental unit by using a standard that's based on a portion of the rent, that not based on the portion of the rent to be paid by the tenant. So what that means is if the unit is $2,000 and the tenant has a Section 8 voucher that will cover $1,800 of that, and their portion is only $200, the tenant's portion of the rent is only $200, the landlord can only apply a standard to determine if the tenant is eligible based on the $200 that the tenant is using, or is paying rather, not on the full $2,000. SB 267 builds on that, and it prohibits the use of a person's credit history for a rental application without offering that person first the option of providing lawful, verifiable alternative evidence of their ability to pay the rent. And that includes that alternative evidence includes government benefit payments, such as general assistance payments, or the like, that would demonstrate that the tenant is able to pay their portion of the rent. Again, this only applies this requirement to offer the option of providing alternative evidence of their ability to pay only applies to tenants who have a government subsidy. If the tenant accepts this offer, then the landlord has to provide a reasonable time for the tenant to provide this alternative evidence and must reasonably consider the alternative evidence. Of course, reasonable is not defined by the statute, so it's kind of up to interpretation, but that is what it says. Slide. AB 548 relates to multifamily building inspections. So this law requires local enforcement agencies to develop policies and procedures for inspecting multifamily buildings where a code enforcement officer has determined that a dwelling unit is substandard in violation of the health and safety code, and has determined that the defects and violations have the potential to affect other units in the building. So it requires local enforcement agencies to adopt policies and procedures that, one, include criteria for determining whether a condition or a violation could affect other units in the building, require code enforcement officers to reasonably attempt to inspect those additional units, including at a minimum the units above, below, and adjacent to the original unit, and allow for an inspection of all units if severe building-wide defects and violations are found. Next slide. After the inspection, the agency must provide the property owner or operator with written notice or an order to repair or to abate the issues. And this notice or order must advise the owner or operator of each violation as well as each action that is required to remedy the violation. The agency also must schedule a reinspection to verify that the conditions and violations have been corrected and repaired. And lastly, local jurisdictions are required to adopt these updates to their policies and procedures by January 1st, 2025. All right, AB 1418. AB 1418 prohibits a local government from adopting or enforcing a policy that does a bunch of things. So the first would be imposing or threatening to impose a penalty against a landlord or a tenant solely for contacting law enforcement. Also requiring or encouraging a landlord to, or imposing a penalty on a landlord for their failure to evict or penalize a tenant for the tenant's association with another tenant or household member who has had contact with law enforcement, evicting or penalizing a tenant for the tenant's alleged unlawful conduct or arrest. And I would note that in this section, this does apply to prior to conviction. It doesn't say anything about whether or not a local government could enforce a policy related to a tenant's conviction. And then including a provision in a lease that provides grounds for eviction in violation of state law, or performing criminal background check on a tenant or prospective tenant. So basically the local government can't require a landlord to perform a criminal background check on a tenant or prospective tenant. Next slide. Continuing on, a local government cannot adopt or enforce a policy that defines contact with law enforcement or request for emergency services as a nuisance, requires a tenant to obtain a certificate of occupancy as a condition of their tenancy of a rental unit, or establishes, maintains, or promotes a registry of tenants for the purpose of discouraging landlords from renting to said tenants. If a local jurisdiction has any of these policies already in place, they must stop enforcing them by January 1, 2024, which is a few weeks ago. And also authorizes, this bill also authorizes any person or nonprofit organization to bring an action seeking injunctive relief to stop an agency or a local government from adopting or enforcing any of these types of policies, and authorizes them to receive attorney's fees and costs if they're successful. Okay, AB 1620. So this bill creates an exemption to the requirement in the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act that a landlord be entitled to establish the initial rental rate for all tenancies. So basically the requirement in Costa-Hawkins that in jurisdictions with rent control, there must be vacancy decontrol, meaning from one tenant to another, a landlord is able to set the initial rental rate. So this basically creates an exemption to that requirement where a jurisdiction requires a landlord of a rent-controlled property to permit a tenant who has a permanent physical disability related to mobility to move to a comparable or smaller unit located on an accessible floor of the property at the same rent and under the same lease terms if certain conditions are met. For instance, there must be no operational elevator serving the tenant's current unit. For this one, the jurisdiction must impose the requirement for it to be applicable. It's not just universally applicable to all rent-controlled properties. All right, AB 1218, demolition of residential rental units. So AB 1218 expands the Housing Crisis Act, or SB 330's replacement housing requirements to all development projects where protected units are to be demolished or have been demolished in the last 5 years. So previously this only applied where the project was going to demolish protected units and replace it with housing, any type of housing, whether that's for sale or rental. Now it applies even if the housing that's the project that's going to replace the demolished protected units is a commercial or other type of project. So protected units include rent-controlled units, deed-restricted units, and units where lower-income households reside, among the other types of units. And so This bill requires a right of first refusal for lower income tenants in the required replacement units, regardless of whether the project is a residential project or a commercial or other type of project, although some types of industrial projects are exempted from this. Where the project is not a housing project, so it's commercial or other type of project, the replacement housing has to be developed prior to or concurrently with the development project. And finally, the developer can contract with another entity, such as a nonprofit housing developer, to develop the replacement housing that's required. I think that's it. I'm happy to take questions on any of these.
Thank you very much. Committee Member Cox.
Yes, on the SB 567 or AB 1482, you had a note in there, as a reminder, the Tenant Protection Act applies to some rental housing units in the city of Mountain View that are not covered by the CSFRA. And I'm wondering, you're referring to the partially covered units by that, or is it something else that you're talking about?
So yes, some of the partially covered units are going to fall into that category, although I think likely they're mostly going to be covered by the rent stabilization provisions, not the just cause for eviction provisions of the Tenant Protection Act. And then some units that are fully exempt, it's possible from the CSFRA, it's possible that the Tenant Protection Act might apply to those.
So I'm trying to get a sense. Can you give me an example? I mean, because like, for instance, I mean, if it's not either partially or fully covered by the CSFRA, I mean, I would have thought that it was, just at will. So why would this apply?
So the CSFRA covers rental units that received a certificate of occupancy prior to 1995 for rent control. So the Tenant Protection Act will cover, in terms of rent increases, units that received a certificate of occupancy post February 1st, 1995 through 2009. For evictions, you cover units that were built before the CSFRA became effective. So units that were built after that will be covered by the Tenant Protection Act.
I see. Okay. Thanks for the clarification on that. And then the last one, I don't know if you had a slide on it or whatever, but there was in the report about AB 1418, and it said something like it prohibits local governments from adopting or enforcing any policy that does any of the following: requires a tenant to obtain a certificate of occupancy as a condition of tenancy. And I'm trying to understand, why would a tenant have to get a certificate of occupancy? And what's the point of the change of that law?
Naz, I think I can answer that now that I've dug into this a little bit. So 1418 is trying to prohibit what are called crime-free ordinances, which appear to be more prevalent than I thought. About 100 jurisdictions in California have them. And they really are ordinances that are designed to require landlords to regulate who moves into their units to prevent crime, is the theory. But they apparently seem to come into effect in jurisdictions when communities have a greater percentage of minority residents.
But what is a certificate of occupancy?
It may be that the tenant has to get something from the police department saying they are entitled to occupy a unit.
Okay.
Thanks
for clarifying that.
Committee Member Ma.
For the new definitions of the state just cause regulations on demolition and remodel and move-in, does that have any effect on our definitions of the same just cause provisions?
No, not for the units you cover. They are not covered by the Tenant Protection Act. The Tenant Protection Act is very clear. You're only subject to one rent stabilization ordinance, and you're only subject to one eviction protection ordinance. So if you cover it, they're not covered by the Tenant Protection Act.
Okay, because I think like our demolition provisions are a little more vague at times about when they kick in. So it's technically, I don't feel they're stricter than the state one, but right now just like you have to do all one or all the other. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, second question is, technically, I guess it's council contract with CLESPA at the moment, but if a person who fits into that, partially covered, but wants to use the Tenant Protection Act's provisions, can they come to the Housing and Eviction Help Center to get legal assistance, or is that mainly you do that with CLESPA on your own? Okay.
No, sorry. Someone who is covered under the CSFRA.
It's let's say someone is they are in an apartment built after 1995, and they want to utilize the TPA's rent cap provisions. They cannot come to the Housing and Eviction Help Center. Is that correct or not?
We can definitely see what we can do, but yeah, in general, CLESPA is higher for CSFRA related issues.
Okay.
So, just a couple of questions. So there was talking about after a substantial remodel, being able for a tenant to be able to return after the remodel is complete. To what rent?
The rent they were previously paying.
Is Mountain View, does it have a similar provision?
Under the CSFRA? Yeah.
Well, I mean, doesn't this go to, Ellis Act and, beyond the CSFRA in a sense? To that, what we had to enact and have the city council also approve?
This is one of the just causes in the CSFRA.
But about what rent you return to?
It says it in the CSFRA.
Well, right. So for the Ellis Act, the city has adopted the Ellis Act protections that require that the tenant be given the right to return to the unit at the rent they were previously paying, subject to rent increases. That's part of the trail.
Okay, so this is separate because that's distinct from remodel. That's from owner move-in.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the city council has to adopt the Ellis Act provisions. You can't do that through regulation. So that's why it's covered there.
Committee Member Ma.
But to clarify, the Ellis Act only involves cases where the landlord decides to get out of the business rather than a remodel, correct?
That's correct.
There was, I think if I'm remembering correctly from the presentation, talked about 3 times damages if there is abuse of owner move-in. And what would be typical damages?
Your actual damages, so what your actual damages were versus 3 times that.
So there have been cases in other jurisdictions that have had trouble damages in their rent ordinances. So the tenants increased rent at their new place might be actual damages, their moving costs, so things in that range.
Thank you. Vice Chair Rosas?
So on AB 1418, can you give me a specific example of what does it mean, require or encourage a landlord to impose a penalty on a landlord for their failure to evict or penalize tenants for tenants association with another tenant household member who has had contact with law enforcement? What does that mean? Is it like, what about if?
So these are considered crime-free ordinances that some cities have adopted to try to essentially make it very difficult for tenants who may have a criminal record or have been arrested but not convicted. That's what they mean by contact with law enforcement. You may have been detained. They're very broad. So.
Yeah, it's a little scary here because I'm like, what about if you were unlawfully detained?
I haven't read all of these ordinances, but apparently there's a lot of latitude.
Yeah, and a lot of them also include just contact or calling emergency services. So that includes like contact with law enforcement. So if someone in your family is having some sort of, mental um, issue, that and you call for help in that situation, some of these ordinances also penalize that type of situation.
So just to be clear, this new law prohibits that.
Right.
So it's no longer allowed to do these things.
Say more. Because, okay, well, hold on. So how I read this is that if I have a contact with law enforcement, I have an emergency at home, I call law enforcement because I hear, somebody's trying to,
So these days, with this new law, the landlord can no longer use it against you that you have been in contact with the police.
Right. And what it's really trying to get at is cities that required landlords to essentially enforce this. So cities can no longer adopt or enforce the ordinances that they may have or the policies that they may have that say that landlords will be penalized if they allow tenants to move into their units that maybe have a criminal background, or they don't evict tenants who have been detained. So this is now prohibited in California. So, and Mountain View, to my understanding, never has had one of these types of ordinances.
So we owe thanks to the state legislators who proposed and passed this bill and got these ordinances wiped off.
This was a unique instance where the California Apartment Association and a lot of tenant organizations were in agreement, because landlords were being essentially required to enforce criminal justice issues, which they don't want to do.
So then it would be unique for saying thank you to the California Apartment Association also. Remember, Ma? Okay. We've not asked for public comment yet, so I think we're ready for that if there are any public comments.
No public comment.
Okay. So now we're back to the committee. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Committee Member Ma.
So relating to a question submitted to staff, it was staff's opinion that we can tonight give direction on implementing AB 1620 on the Costa-Hawkins for permanently disabled residents to move from second and third floors to first floor.
So we have to adopt local rules to implement that in Mountain View.
Right. I think the question is, can you give us direction on that? That's not the agenda item. So under the Brown Act, no. I think what we said to you is we believe that this board could adopt the necessary regulations to implement that. So we could agendize that at a future meeting.
Okay, any further questions, comments? Okay, we're ready to move on. So our next item is committee staff announcements and updates. Are there presentations?
Yes. All right, thank you. Okay, here we are. All right, so our final agenda item is agenda item 6.1, and we'll just go over upcoming workshops and help center dates. So we'll start off with our office hours and upcoming workshops. So we continue to hold our virtual office hours that we hold every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And people can register online, and this is through Zoom. And I do just want to note that we have had a lot of attendance with these virtual office hours as of late, especially with property registration and fee payment, and some petitioners coming in to request staff assistance. All right, we'll follow up now with our workshops. So we do have a workshop coming up on February 8th. This one is tenant focused and it will be bilingual. It's at 6:30 p.m. and we will be discussing tenant protections and evictions. And it will also be hybrid, so virtual and in person. And then the next two workshops that we have, February 13th at 2 p.m. and February 27th at 2 p.m., are going to be focused on property registration and annual fees. Those will both be landlord focused. The first will be virtual only, and the second will be in person. And we do general information about registration and fee payment, and then we go into an online tutorial and we walk people through that process step by step. And we'll look here now at our Housing Help Center. And this, again, we have split them up. So we have a landlord specific and a tenant specific. So our landlord specific help centers are during the day from 1 to 3 p.m. and they are at our offices at 298 Escuela. These are hybrid, so you can join on Zoom or you can come in person. And again, I will mention these have been heavily attended, again, largely due to property registration and fee payment. And finally, we'll look at our housing help center that is tenant focused, and these are in the evenings to accommodate people's schedules when they get off of work and after they've had dinner with their families. So again, that's from 6 to 8 p.m. These are hybrid as well, so people can join on Zoom or come in person. And we offer a lot of information and support surrounding housing programs, so affordable housing programs through the city. We help people apply for those. We also provide assistance around rent stabilization and eviction help. We do have on-site legal resources, so we do have them through Zoom, but now also CLESPA has dedicated themselves to join one of the evenings a month in person, so we do have actual in-person help now from CLESPA on site at the Help Center. And we also have additional support services where people can get information about food distribution, rent assistance, mediation, and homelessness prevention resources. And we do have one staff person from CSA on site in person as well at the Help Center for tenants. All right, so that concludes our outreach and workshop schedule. Are there any questions about that?
Thank you. I'd like to add one comment for future meetings is that some of us are interested to try the motion making and speaker queue software called Granicus that's available on these displays. So at some point in the future, we'll give that a try. So any comments on that? Some people are ready.
We do have an email out to the city clerk's office as we speak to get training on that and then to train you all on how to use that. So hopefully we can get that in the next meeting or so.
Robert, did EPC use that software?
Yes, we did, and it's pretty easy to use. I mean, what we usually did for the training was people show up a half hour before the meeting, and they just run you through it.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to adjourn our meeting, and I think I just have to declare that, yes? Yeah. Our meeting is adjourned at 9:03. And our next Rental Housing Committee meeting is Thursday, February 22, this year at 7 o'clock. Thank you.